Hello, my name is Phil Easter, historian and writer from Baltimore, Maryland, also known as the Amazing Memory Man. This is YouTube story number 9 on my YouTube channel, which is Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. Today I call this story Septembers to Remember. A number of events in my life that happened in the month of September from different years, including some photographs I will share with all of you of two of the most special trips in my life, which way back in 1972 and 1979. But first, I would like to mention we are recording this on Sunday, September 18th, 2022. This was the birthday of my maternal grandmother, Mary Arnold. Her name was at birth, born September 18th, 1879 in Cumberland, Maryland. And for those of you not familiar with the state of Maryland, that's in the western part of the state, of Cumberland, in western Maryland. And years later, she became a nurse. She came to Baltimore shortly after her daughter, my mom, was born, and around the World War I era, or shortly thereafter, 1920s, I guess early 20s, and my grandmother became a nurse. She was a nurse for 35 years, a registered nurse. So I just want to briefly mention that, honor her memory. She was born this day, September 18th, 1879. Well, one of the most interesting trips I ever took in my life was in September 1972, when my mom and I took a trip to Europe. We went to Holland, Denmark, Germany, and actually spent 2 days in Paris at the end of the trip before coming back. But part of that trip was 1 week in Munich, Germany, where we saw the last several days of the historic Olympic Games of 1972 in Munich. So I'll start with some photographs here from that trip in 1972, September 1972. We left exactly September 1st. I'm going to go actually to the part in chronological order. I have some of the pictures of the Olympic events in this album listed first. That was a very major event, but actually our trip began going to Denmark. We flew from New York to Denmark overnight, September 1st, arriving on the 2nd. And this is a nice thing. We got there a card of many of the kings of Denmark going back about 1,000 years, a little historical chronicle of the kings of Denmark. And this is some of the money they have, at least as of 50 years ago. They might be part of that European Union now, and I'm not sure. I know a number of countries are, so maybe the currency is different, but this is how it looked 50 years ago. And some pictures of the Copenhagen area. And see, that's what I have for Denmark. So, all right, so then we went to Germany next. So now we go to front of the album, the way I have the pictures arranged. But in Munich, this beautiful area near called Nymphenburg Palace, a part of Munich, and I took this photo of this, like a lantern there, with the fountain in the background. I had it perfectly in the lantern. It's a beautiful area, the Nymphenburg Palace area, the gardens. Now here, of course, is the Olympic flame. I took that on the final day of the Munich Olympics, which was September 11th, 1972. We had tickets for the equestrian event, the horse jumping competition, in the afternoon, and went to the stadium and saw that. And I took the picture of the flame that had burned during the 2 weeks of the games. And here's tickets to some of the events we saw. This was rowing competition, and some photographs of the area where that took place. And it's very nice. They only took off a small part of your ticket here. They let you keep most of it. And as many of you know, in Europe they date day, month, and year. Not like here, month, day, and year. Like in Europe, this would be called 18 September 2022 instead of most Americans calling it September 18th. So where it says 7/9 for this ticket in particular, that meant the 7th day of September of 1972, not July 9th. But as I explained in one of my YouTube stories recently about the Munich Olympics, I did 2 special YouTube stories just about the Munich Olympics. Because of the terrible tragedy of the 11 athletes from Israel who were murdered over that 2-day period, September 5th and 6th, the events we saw were actually 24 hours later. So while this says September, supposed to be the 7th of September, it was actually the 8th. The events, the tickets we had were listed September 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, but we saw those events on the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. So it was, the tickets I have, I think, are quite historic. The events actually took place 1 day later because of that tragic event. Here's a ticket for some of the basketball games. And here's the Olympic Park. This was the judo competition. We saw 1 day of judo. I just took 2 pictures. My camera wasn't the best for indoor pictures, but I took those 2. And these are very beautiful tickets, I think. And I've seen tickets at many other Olympics. And I also went to Montreal in 1976. And I've seen, photos of tickets from many Olympics. But the Munich Olympic tickets were among the nicest designs, I think, ever. And then this was the gold medal basketball game ticket, which, as I explained before in the story just about the Olympics in Munich, was very controversial. It appeared the U.S. had won by 1 point, but then the president of the International Basketball Federation came out of the stands and ordered the Brazilian referee to put 3 seconds back up on the clock. And the USSR won by 1 point, 51-50. These were 2 of the basketball players of the United States team in the track stadium the next day. And as you see, they're not very happy. The only time the United States ever lost the gold medal at that point in Olympic history, and in such a controversial way, they did not accept their silver medals. And at the guest house where we were staying, a German lady owned the house, of course, and my mom and I were staying in one of the rooms, but the other room was a young couple from Great Britain who were living in Germany. They were working at Bavarian Motor Works. They did not know that we saw that controversial basketball game, so they left this note under our door in the morning, but we had seen it as the young married couple from Great Britain. But I thought that was cute, so I kept this all these years as part of my memorabilia of the Munich Olympics. A handwritten note by a young man and woman from Great Britain who did not know we saw that game, but we had. And this is the ticket for track and field, the final day of track and field events that we saw. And some of the events, the 1,500 meters was one event. There were about 9 gold medal events that day in track and field. I was so happy to see Frank Shorter of the United States become the first American to win the marathon, the Olympic marathon, since 1908 in London, 64 years before. You will notice among the many flags of many countries, the flag of Israel was at half-staff, again to honor the slain athletes. What a terrible tragedy that was. And here some of the equestrian events. So those are the tickets and photographs, mostly from Munich. We'll have a few more here for the Olympic Park area. They had extra practice fields for some of the athletes. Another photo of the flame that I took with some people here. It was a cloudy day, but I still think it was a good photo. And this, the founder of the modern Olympics, this stamp was made by East Germany, actually. It says DDR, that means the Deutsche Demokratische Republic from East Germany. They call themselves the Democratic Republic, but it was very much a communist country. The proper name of West Germany at that time was the Federal Republic of Germany. As you all know, Germany reunited in 1990 as one nation again. And here's some stamps, United States stamps in honor of the Olympics. And this beautiful quote by the founder, Pierre de Coubertin. And we're back to Denmark. I put those pictures. Okay, so now, more pictures of the Munich area. I did not take this photo. It's a postcard, but as I say, nighttime my camera wasn't so good. But the daytime I took this photo of the same area. So it's nice to get, the day and night of this nice area of Munich called the Marienplatz. And here's some German money, the marks. And then the Löwenbräu beer, which we went to the Hofbrauhaus, a famous beer hall in Munich. And for right now, this time of year in September, they actually have the Oktoberfest. I saw the TV news, it just started yesterday in Munich, the Oktoberfest. These stamps, many stamps of Olympic stamps, I purchased actually, amazingly, here in Baltimore at a department store, the old Hustler's department store. Later that same year in 1972, because I had a part-time job there. During the Christmas season, they hired a lot of young people, and I worked there in November, December of 1972, and I noticed they had many Olympic stamps among their many stamp collection. Well, we also took a boat down the Rhine River. That was a beautiful experience on September 14th, 1972. Some photos I took from the boat on the Rhine River in Germany. And this is a postcard from Cologne, the great cathedral in Cologne. And we briefly saw that cathedral in person. And then we took a train, an overnight train, to The Hague in Holland. Now this meant a lot to my mom because many years ago, before I was born, she worked at the U.S. Embassy in Holland at The Hague for 2 years, 1947, 1949. She worked for the ambassador there as a secretary, and then in London, 1949 to 51. So she was part of our U.S. State Department after World War II. And in this photo, we were so lucky, our hotel, the next morning, September 15th, we arrived the night of the 14th, and sure enough, there was a parade, and the Queen of Holland is in that carriage. So we didn't actually quite literally see her, but Queen Juliana was in this carriage. Apparently, they opened the Parliament every year around September 15th, on or about that day. Just by total luck, we were in the right place to observe some of these festivities from our bedroom window. Imagine that. You're having breakfast and the Queen of Holland comes by in a carriage. And here's this photo here outside the hotel. Just before we left Munich, a very nice lady who owned a shop, a store of some kind. My mom and I walked in. We saw this Olympic flag that was around many stores in Munich. The Olympic rings with the German flag on top, and it made it official for the Munich Olympics. And we offered. I said we'd like to buy it if you're willing to sell it to us. You know what she said? She said, if this goes to America, I want you to have it. That was very touching indeed. This lady, a German lady who owned the shop, gave us that flag. She had a very high opinion of the United States, and that was just so touching. So I was holding it here. One time I had my photo taken with that flag in Holland. And then we also went to Amsterdam, of course, and some of the canals and this boat here. We have it's hard to see, but actually, here real close, I think it says President Roosevelt. You know, Teddy and Franklin Roosevelt were of Dutch descent. the Roosevelts were president, and also way back, Martin Van Buren, who was the 8th president of the United States. He was of Dutch descent also, and in fact, when he was president, they say he spoke mostly Dutch in the White House, a lot more than English, back in the 1800s, when he became the 8th president. Well, in 1979, I took a wonderful trip to Great Britain and Ireland. This album I traveled 15 weeks to many parts of Great Britain and Ireland from June 26th to October 10th, 1979. So here I will show the photos from the September, the last month of that trip, pretty much. I came back October 10th. I didn't take too many photos, it so happened in early October, but these are the photos I took in September. At that point, I traveled to Scotland, the early part of September. I just came from Wales. These pictures were taken late August, technically. So in early September, I was in Scotland, areas mostly near Glasgow and Edinburgh. And I took some photos of other places. Now this is in Edinburgh, Scotland. How do you like that name of that stadium? They named it after me, huh? Easter Road Stadium. I was very surprised. Just went to see a soccer game. I said, oh, how about the name of that stadium? So the game was between the Edinburgh team and the Glasgow Celtic team, or Celtic, whichever way you want to pronounce it, Celtic or Celtic. These were some of the fans after the game, and apparently when you walk up to get a ticket, I'd never been to a game there before, so they asked, what side are you supporting? I said, well, I just like to watch a soccer game. I'm from the United States. He said, well, you have to pick a side because they try to keep the fans apart. They've had, sometimes you get in a little scrape sometime, you know? So I said, okay, well, root for the home team. Why not? Edinburgh, so. Now then, after I left Scotland, I took a train down to York, England, in mid-September. As a matter of fact, it was this day, September 18th. I arrived in York. How about that? 43 years ago today. Now that I think of it, it was exactly September 18th. And some statues, actually, okay, yeah, this is the York Cathedral here. Great York Minster, it's called. I enjoyed that area. It was some of the walls built by the Romans 2,000 years ago. Fascinating. But this is really funny. Near York, in a small town nearby, there were a group of Englishmen reenacting an American Civil War battle. Imagine that. They played the part of Union and Confederate soldiers. I thought that was funny. And it was interesting in a way, but I would much rather have seen, you know, like a medieval battle reenactment, you know, like the War of the Roses or something, you know, one of those famous civil wars in England, the War of the Roses, or the rebellion by Cromwell against King Charles I in the 1600s, that type of reenactment. But that's okay. It's interesting how these particular men seem to be interested in American Civil War history. I just thought that was funny. Last place I expect that would be in England, you know, to see. But it was interesting. And then I went back to Ireland. I say back because on that overall trip, I'd been to Ireland from July 18th to about August 14th. Then I came back to parts of Britain, England, Scotland, Wales for much of August. But as we're doing mainly September events in this story, so came back to Ireland the second time on the same overall trip. And I heard that the Pope was coming there, and indeed people were getting ready for the papal visit of Pope John Paul II, which was an historic event because no Pope had ever been to Ireland before. Which is kind of surprising because it's a very Catholic country. But this Pope, Pope John Paul II, just became Pope in 1978, the year before, and he would travel to many countries around the world. He came to the United States several times, In fact, I saw him here in Baltimore in October of 1995. Uh, but so this was still early in his papacy, just the first year, and he went to Ireland, and the people there, about 1 million people, gathered at Phoenix Park, Dublin. They estimate about 1 million. It's a very large park. It's about 10 miles around. It's the largest city park of any city in Europe, and second only to a very large park in Beijing, China, as the whole world for a city park within a city limits, technically. Phoenix Park, Dublin. Dublin is smaller than London or New York, but the Phoenix Park is larger than Hyde Park and Central Park, of those two larger cities, of about 8 million each. But in that time, they told me that in Ireland there were 3.2 million people in the Republic of Ireland, so almost 1/3 of the country was at one place at one time. I know that night I went to a pub and the police, I talked to some police officers, and they were very relieved that nothing bad happened, thank goodness. In Ireland, they're called the Garda, Garda. The police are called the Garda. I learned that. So those are photos of September events of those two special trips long ago. Now, in 1984, I took a 10-day trip to Canada. I went to the cities of Ottawa and Toronto, and my first day in Ottawa, I flew from Baltimore to Ottawa, I think it was September 5th, so the next day, September 6th, I'm out for a run. I was a very good distance runner at that time, so I left my hotel and just wanted to explore the city, and what better way to take a run, a couple of miles. And I happened to go by the Houses of Parliament, just arbitrarily, and I noticed over there all these people gathered, 100 or more people, and they seemed to be crowded around one man. I'm thinking to myself, what's going on? So I walk over, then I slow down to a walk, I go over, and sure enough, it was the new Prime Minister of Canada. His name was Brian Mulroney. He was just elected 3 or 4 days before. And I thought back, before I left Baltimore, a few days before, I heard on the news that he was elected. So I walked up then and shook hands with the new Prime Minister of Canada. I thought that was neat. I said, I was dressed just in shorts and a t-shirt, not as dignified looking as the other people who were on their lunch hour from work, but that was all right. And that was just arbitrarily luck. My first day in Canada, first full day, meet the Prime Minister. And it was a very beautiful city, Ottawa. I was there about 5 days altogether. Then took a train from Ottawa to Toronto. I stayed there about 5 days in September of '84. And I went to the Ice Hockey Hall of Fame. It was in Toronto. And I also went to a baseball game at Exhibition Park, I think it was called then, before they built the new stadium, the one that has the retractable roof. If it's nice weather, they keep it open. If it's raining or snowing, they can close it. How about that? But this was the old park, but I saw the Toronto Blue Jays beat the New York Yankees 2-1. I was happy to see the home team win. You can be sure of that. But that incredible tower in Toronto, where the Canadian television network, I think, has it's a major station, whatever. It's one of the tallest structures in the world, and you take the elevator to the top of that. It is quite a view. It really is a tremendous view. That tower in Toronto. And also there, I went to their science museum, a very nice science museum they have there. And that was the same year I just stopped working here in Baltimore. For 3.5 years, I worked at the Maryland Science Center at Baltimore's Inner Harbor from 1981 to July of '84. So that was just a couple months after I left the Science Center in Baltimore. I just thought that one in Toronto was so nice also. So that was a 10-day trip to Canada in 1984 in September. But years later now, I'll flash forward here to some 2 years in this century, the 21st century. wonderful experience I did in 2016, just 6 years ago, as I was the subject of a major memory study by two prominent doctors at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And for much of the year 2016, they did a study on me, on my outstanding memory ability. So I'm very happy to say that I have contributed to medical science research. And on September 26th that year, 2016, I was invited to a special event at Hopkins Hospital called the Grand Rounds. Now, usually the Grand Rounds at a hospital is often a medical person who speaks, is invited to speak. You know, maybe a doctor or someone related to medical from another hospital or even another university. But because I did this study for the two doctors, they wanted me to speak that day. They asked me if I could come and speak before. It was close to 100 people, doctors, therapists, nurses, and various people at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. And so two good friends of mine, Rosalind and Sam, who I've known for many years, they came to my house, and the three of us took a cab over there at 11 o'clock in the morning. That was a push. As most people who know me know, I'm not a morning person. And I usually give my own lectures. When I gave lectures at Johns Hopkins or the Pratt Library, it's always late afternoon or early evening over the years. But somehow we did it pretty well that one day, from about 11 to 12. And one of the doctors asked me a number of questions about my life and U.S. and world history, which I answered. And I shared information with many of those people, most of whom were younger than me, and really they thought my talent was quite amazing. How at that time I was just about 65 years old, and how I could recall so many events of my life, as well as my studied history of events in U.S. and world history and sports history, remembering in so many cases not just the year, but the exact date, combination, day, month, and year, for so many events. And that was very special to do that at Johns Hopkins Hospital for the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine on September 26, 2016. Well, 4 years ago, on this month, on September 13th, 2018, I was invited by the Pratt Library, which is the main library in Baltimore. It's called Enoch Pratt Library. And besides the central headquarters, they have many branches. So I was invited by the manager of the Orleans Street branch, which is also near Hopkins Hospital, to give a talk on one of my favorite subjects, history of the modern Olympic Games, where not only do I tell my stories about Munich 1972 and Montreal 1976, but also the games since 1896. I've studied a lot about every modern Olympics ever since 1896 when they began. So that was very satisfying, and my friends Rosalind, Sam, and Bob came with me, and we gave the lecture there on September 13th, 2018. Well, I'm hoping that in the coming year I will be able to give more public lectures again in the Baltimore area. The pandemic, of course, in 2020 and 21, so many things were canceled, but I think more places are having guest speakers once again. And actually, earlier this year in April, I gave a talk at the class of one of those doctors at Hopkins who teaches a course called the Neuroscience of Learning and Memory. But I'm hoping next year in 2023 also to give talks at the Pratt Library and maybe the Baltimore County Library. I'm hoping to do that. Things are getting somewhat back to normal after this terrible time of the pandemic. And so I'm happy today again to have shared stories with you that I call Septembers to Remember. Thank you again for choosing my channel, Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. And we will see you very soon for more stories. As a matter of fact, the fall season begins this coming week. So the next time it will be in the beautiful fall season, or autumn if you prefer. often my favorite season of the year. This is Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.